Welcome back. Welcome to Small Things Brought Together. My name is Robin Love. Small Things Brought Together is an ongoing series of conversations with artists and others about their creative process. So we engage in a long format conversation, which means we have time to really dig into ideas, circle back, have moments of silence, fumble for our words, and then find them. So we have space to explore this idea of what is the creative process. So I am very excited today to have with me Elizabeth Briel. Elizabeth is an artist, painter, printmaker, works with paper, textiles, many things, living in Hong Kong. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much.
So happy to have you. I know it's quite late in Hong Kong, so thank you for joining me at night.
Good morning to you. Good evening to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm very excited to have you on Small Things Brought Together, and really excited to talk about your work because it is so process oriented. And I feel like you have many threads that run through a lot of your projects that I really see continuing as you move through these different projects. And one of them is that you are an immigrant to Hong Kong and you've lived in Asia, various places in Asia for a long time.
20 years.
Yeah. So maybe that's a place to start. Maybe do you want to add anything as an introduction that would be helpful for people to know about you?
Sure. Thank you so much. As a wonderful introduction. The question often I get by Westerners, especially, is why Hong Kong? And it's kind of like it's for an immigrant, a place, especially a serial immigrant like me, where I immigrate to first I was a migrant to Hong Kong. I first came here in 2006 and then stayed 2 years, but I was really in a transitory phase of my life. We were looking with my former husband, we were looking to move back to the West, and we moved to Australia after Hong Kong the first time. It was really, like for many foreigners here, it was a place of passage. But when I came back in 2016, after having lived in Beijing for 4 years, I had decided I was going to immigrate to Hong Kong, which means at least staying here for 7 years, living and working and making work. I had the job that made it possible for me to afford to live in this city. And so I kind of chance and waiting and a bit of chance, a bit of strategy allowed me to come back to a city that I love very much, and a city that will be a part of my life for the rest of my life, even though I won't always live here. So with that knowledge that as a foreigner here, whose face is that of a colonizer, in a way, when people look at me, I have the face of somebody who, looks like people who would have come with the British, and the Americans were colonizers here too. And there is always that aspect to life here. So living in a place as an immigrant versus kind of a transitory phase is such a different relationship with the place, and in terms of how we feel about it and think about it and interact with it, as a place of living, and a place, as a foreign artist, we are always inspired. I hate the word inspired by, but our surroundings affect us if you're sensitive to them, the new taste, the new smells, the new light. I often find it kind of romantic and slightly ridiculous when people talk about the light of southern France. Of course it's amazing, but it's amazing in Arizona, it's amazing in Minneapolis where I grew up, it's amazing everywhere if you just look. I didn't come to Hong Kong for inspiration. I came to Hong Kong because I could make a living doing what I love, and I could be an artist here for a while. Not forever. It's an authoritarian state. I'm not going to get too deep into the politics, but I came here from Beijing pretty aware of what the situation was going to look like, and it's heartbreaking, and yet I love Hong Kong people, and I'm really happy to be here. So this space that you see me in actually is it's old for Hong Kong. It's from the 1960s. It's a flat that I've lived in for 4 years, and I have actually, during the pandemic, You see these grates here that are above the walls. That's kind of a natural form of air conditioning that was pretty typical in straight Chinese homes and in Chinese homes in Southeast Asia in the mid 20th century. And so I used this kind of decor. I was thinking a lot during the pandemic about wind and air, and we're stuck in a place for a long period of time, and we look at the light change, and I was thinking a lot about ventilation and people on ventilators. And so I started to look at all the holes by which architects that design this kind of place put in place to have natural air conditioning, so the wind comes through here in the summer. So I traced every single hole where the light comes through and where the air comes through, and that became probably one of my favorite installations that I've made. Yeah, called the ventilation paintings. They're kind of a
Yeah.
combination of painting and printmaking. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to look at some of those. It is super intriguing. And I guess when I was looking at your work, I didn't really put all the dates together, but I was thinking about how in the pandemic, ventilator, and just that beginning of the pandemic when we really didn't know how the disease was spread. And something like the air, I don't know if this was true in Hong Kong, but I felt it even here in Newfoundland, where there's just not that many people, but like the air became almost sinister.
Absolutely.
You didn't know, is it safe to breathe? What a strange feeling that is. So yeah, I was really appreciating the ventilation series. But I
We
wanted
felt that here. Yeah. I'll just quickly kind of dig in. So we have some of the most highly concentrated neighborhoods in the world, and I live next to one, and I live in a very densely populated area. It's a ninth floor walk up. And because SARS hit here pretty devastating in 2001, that traumatized the people here, and it changed a lot of government decisions, and it made people acutely aware of how deadly a respiratory virus could be and how it could spread. And actually, one of the worst outbreaks here in 2001 was from 2002 was from the bathroom, the ventilation in the air conditioning system, and people knew that. And so, yes, they were terrified, and of course, I, being a resident here and having moved here shortly after, was as well. So it's just, there's an awareness here of the dangers of living so closely to one another and the inevitability of it. And our personal space here is very, very thin, very fine, which is, and how people manage to deal with that is really, I think, beautiful. And I have so much respect for Hong Kongers. In North America, we have such huge amounts of personal space, and we interact with one another so differently than here in a very tightly packed city. So people would often ask me, oh, because I live alone, oh, don't you get lonely, Elizabeth? And I'm like, no, I have like a million neighbors. I actually I never feel lonely here, because, I would feel lonely if I lived in the countryside alone. But I like being in a very dense city.
Can I ask you to give an example of how people manage personal space in Hong Kong?
When I So it's funny when you get to know a place and then you get to know it again after some context in between with some other places, right? So when I came back here, but this time from Beijing. So Beijing is a capital city of an empire. The streets are very wide. People drive relatively slowly. It's kind of, it feels a little imperious, whereas here the streets are very densely packed, and there's just an absolute awareness in the metro, the MTR, and in the subways in the morning. People are just, you slink past one another. The way people move, and you have to avoid the inevitable collisions. My mom was worried about me when I came back here. She said, oh, it's so stressful, this big city, and she would send me these apps, like meditation apps. I was like, no, Mom. I took a video of the subway in the morning of like hundreds and hundreds of people just going slowly down the corridors. I was like, this is my meditation. You pack together and you have to wear the earbuds to just cope. And yeah, people, yes, there's a distance that you get in the city, but people really do care. And I have to say, it's not the most extroverted city that I've lived in, but I mean, I have so much respect for Hong Kongers, and actually, I have to say, I learned how to be a practical person by living here, because in such an expensive city, in such a dense city, you can't really, there's not a lot of room for there's just not a lot of mental space for some of the things artists need to do, honestly. And that's part of why it's hard to live here for a lot of people as an artist, because you have society cramping you in. You have, for me as a foreigner, it's different because I'm a little outside that. But yes, the mental space here is very, very small as well. And I think that's harder. The physical space is one thing, but the mental space is very different. And the last 3 years since the protest and then the pandemic and the crackdowns, with so many things being illegal now, basically very little free speech, that is very, very hard for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate, yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about, well, I was thinking a lot about your work and how it's modular and you're using mostly paper, sometimes fabrics, rarely, I guess. There, yeah, I won't say never like canvas, but it feels like materials that are transient. You can pack them up. You have
Exactly.
these huge installations, but like if you put you can make a stack. And yeah, and that experience of how do you manage when you're, as you said, you had for a time a transient life, not just an immigrant life. Um, just to share, I am also an immigrant, though within North America. And there is a way that it gives you. I remember talking to a guy who was living here in Newfoundland, who had moved from outside of Newfoundland, and he wrote this beautiful little paragraph to me in an email about how the sort of beauty of being the outsider is that we we notice and just deeply appreciate even the most mundane thing. For me, it's like some road signs, or just seeing like a particular style of curtain that a lot of people have, and they just like stand out to me so much, and I just love it. And if I talk to someone who grew up here, they're just like, I don't even know what you're talking about, but
I
like
think it's so
me,
obvious to them.
yeah, it's just like, yeah, they can't even see, but to us, it's like, it's part of the delight of living in this place. And there's sort of the other side, which is, not having access to some of the family life, or even some of the community life that relies upon family connection. And some things will just always be sort of outside of our reach or hidden, or so. Yeah, I've thought a lot about like the trade-off of that. Those two ways of being in a community. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Absolutely, thank you so much for sharing, because they are so true and I think so important. And often, because they are in a way so essential, they often get overlooked when we talk about these things. And I would say also perhaps that distance of being an outsider where we are, and then an outsider also from where we're from, it also gives us quite perspective on our home country, whether we want it or not. And in the last couple of years, maybe because it's been 20 years since I lived in the US. I left the US in 2003 saying I would never live there again. I was going to find a home, or homes plural, outside the US, and I knew that I was never going to live in the States again. And it's only the last couple of years I've really been thinking about why. And I lived for a time quite near where George Floyd was murdered, and I know that neighborhood, and the reckoning that we've had in the U.S. is something that finally there are platforms available for people that there didn't used to be to share. But we have always known this in our bones that America has been built on blood and the murder of people, and I have been haunted by it forever. It sounds very white, haunted, but I'm trying to figure out how to deal with this through my work, because that's how I deal with trauma, or with things that I can't express any other way with these feelings. I work through it by making things, you know. My work doesn't come from a pretty place, though I do like it when my work is pretty, you know, or when it is engaging aesthetically, and that can draw people in to then kind of look at some of the other things beneath it. But I can't do that about America yet, though I hope someday I can, maybe by some collaborations. But it's, yeah, it's, I was raised on land that was given to people because of murder, you know. That's what it is. And every time I go back, it's somehow worse, this haunting. Last time I was there, I told my mom, how can we own land here? How can anybody own land? How can we know that, you know, that
Yeah.
that knowledge, you know, and it haunts, it's behind everything, you know, behind the fear of one another that Americans have, this terrible fear that I've never really felt in Asia or in Europe, that people aren't afraid of one another like that. There's not the gun culture, and the gun culture, of course, comes from white supremacy, forced incarceration of people, and yeah, it's just all these things that finally are getting talked about. And really, as a white person, generally, I just shut up about it and I listen, because my voice is not really, yeah. So usually I listen to these things. There's a lot to take in and a lot to discuss, you know, people. But it's finally getting talked about more and shared more, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in a way, I think because I was born in a settler colonial culture, when my husband and I moved to Australia for his job, 2009, 2008, I loved Australia, but that is also settler colonial culture, and I couldn't in I couldn't feel comfortable there. Australians are wonderful people. It's a beautiful country, but in a way, if since I was born into settler colonialism, I could, you know, I was dealing with that, but I couldn't voluntarily choose it, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of the place that I moved. So I couldn't, I told my husband after a year, I said, I can't stay here for that long. You know, he also felt similarly as an Englishman. So yeah, it's just, you know, by doing more than visiting a place, by really looking at, okay, as an artist, as a creative person, we are part of an ecosystem, right? And we make what we make, and as we get older, as we formulate more what we make, we understand more. And then when we look to move to a place, uh, we look to see what is happening in this place. Is there something that I can contribute, not as in a charitable thing, but just is there a place maybe for my work, for what I do? Can the way I see things, can it be not harmful? Can it be, you know, beyond just me, you know, a symbiotic relationship rather than what can I get from this place? Okay, the light in southern France is awesome. If I move to southern France, it will not be for the freaking light. it will be it will be for the people and the culture, the many cultures in the area, not just one French culture. And you know, the world is complicated. It has layers of things, and I think if we just look at, you know, the easy parts, that's tourism. That's fine, but I'm not. I do tourism, you know, but not in a place I'm going to stay in. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm rambling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting. And I'm really, yeah, I'm really appreciating that you're bringing up the complexity because I've really felt like to get, if we're ever going to break free of, not break free of, but to genuinely acknowledge the harm is to see its complexity uh, for everyone there. And yes, I do think that uh, white people shouldn't be leading the charge in a certain way. There's also a place for white people to speak among themselves and each other, and acknowledging the harm and dealing with our own harm. I mean, yeah, anyway, this is a very complicated conversation, and it's hard to say anything because of fear of causing more harm, and just like how unused to having these conversations we all are. We white people are.
Yes, because we have.
Other people are pretty used to it. Yeah. Yeah. So really appreciating also the role that art can play, because I think, well, art stimulates conversation, and it doesn't need words to evoke experience.
So
And
often that's why we make it, because we don't have words for these things that
yeah,
we feel and that we have to make physical.
yeah.
And it's because we don't have words for it yet. And sometimes when a curator sees a piece, or when other people see our piece, they can articulate things about it, or they can create meaning for it that wasn't maybe there before. And that can actually be really helpful, or sometimes harmful. The more I've been realizing about just how, as a Western, so often we say Western here in Asia as a metaphor for white, but really as a white artist here, there have been, I, it's tough. If I can share my screen really quick, I'll just bring up the ventilation.
Okay. Let me just
And
make you a host. So you
great. Let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah, I'll just try to share this one. Okay, it's from Instagram, so it's a bit dense looking, but
can.
some Hong Kong people who lived overseas, so these are Hong Kong people of various backgrounds, but they looked at this when I gave a presentation at a printmaking conference a couple years ago, and they cried, because they missed Hong Kong so much. And I thought, this this artist is articulating exactly how I know I'm going to feel when I leave, next
Mhm,
year,
mhm.
because these shapes, they're what you see in older Hong Kong homes, like working class homes, like the one I live in. And there's nothing like this shape anywhere in the world. Other places may use it, but not to the same degree. And it doesn't evoke the same feel and the smells and durian and the street and the rats and the nighttime. And just, it evokes so many things. And I thought, I hesitated doing this and showing it. And I wondered, am I appropriating, because this is not my history. But then I thought, this is my home. And I am literally making prints from my home and the walls that I'm in. So yes, I'm a foreigner here, and I'm an immigrant from a privileged background. As an American citizen, as a white person here, I'm given privilege that Africans are not here, that Asians and especially darker skinned people are not at all. But I just thought, this is my home, and so I'm tracing it, and I have to be okay with that. And yes, some people say, oh, you're guilty, you're feeling guilty, or you're thinking too much. It's like, no, I think it's important that all of us as artists, people who work with visual culture, we need to think about what we're doing. I'm very emphatic about that. I really think, we need to think about it, we need to own it. There was this artist, Dana, a painter a couple of years ago who, did work based on Emmett Till's death, and she was a white woman.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
not, we need to think about what we're doing. What's our relationship with these cultures, whether within our society or especially for outsiders from a place like here that has been colonized twice, once by the West and now being returned to China. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think part of that, I think, speaking from my own experience, maybe is that there's a kind of I guess I'll just name it as a white supremacist or white centric idea that we white people can present art just like, here's my art, and with no context
yeah,
offered. And so part of, say, using vents that anyone from Hong Kong is going to know Hong Kong from, or is to offer the context so that so it's not just like this idea we can just hand something out on a platter and everyone will be like, yeah, accepting it exactly as we understand it ourselves. And there has to be some actual contextualization of what you're doing. And that's not a bad thing, actually.
I think more and more a lot of us are thinking, oh, we have to actually look at where we are creating, who has done things before. We're taught to do this in school, we're told to do this in school, but I think sometimes we can just get so into what we're doing, we don't maybe, yeah. And if as a culture that's encouraged appropriation, visual appropriation from other cultures, which until recently, I think it was pretty common in the States. Yeah, actually, I was just researching this designer, Charlotte Perriand, and I love her work, but she borrowed so much from Japanese culture. There are times I was like, oh, she's really pushing it. She's pushing it. I think if she had been American and lived in Japan and brought these designs back, we would be questioning her a bit more now. But because she's French, the French don't. I'm not knocking the French, I love, but the French relationship to Asia is also something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also to say, like, I don't know if there's any way of not making some kind of mistake, doing something that lands wrong, and I guess I wish we live in a world where like there's space for that, and for people to say like this is how it's landing, and then for people to recalibrate. I really hope that we get to the place where there's room for mistakes and room for but where the harm that has been done is so deep and long. Yeah.
Yeah, we're still figuring out how to live together
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the same world,
Yeah. Yeah.
wherever I've been, and I'm sure you feel this too, we humans everywhere, we want a roof over our heads, we want our loved ones to be okay, we want to love, we want food, we want these things, and they're all the same, that we all have the same desires, but some people have easier access to some of these things than others, and that's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And it's a complicated web that we have woven. Yes.
So it's wonderful to talk to you tonight, this morning, about some things. And yeah, did you have some questions or
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
books or?
Absolutely. Well, I think since I've given you the hosting duties, I don't know whether you have it handy if you want to call up your Instagram or your website. I feel like there's work on both that we could definitely talk about. And what do you want to talk about? I mean, for me, I think, the ventilation project was definitely one that I had in my mind to talk about, and your newest piece that you just presented. Maybe let's start there.
Okay, let's get this up. Bring my website up, which, okay, the homepage is now very boring looking, but it's basically the stuff I have coming up. So let's see, to the art, which, yes, okay, the newest work I actually don't have on my website yet.
Yeah.
So I should probably bring that on my personal Instagram. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll bring it up here.
So this is an exhibition installation that is literally just came down, right? It just ended, yeah.
Yeah, here's some pictures of us setting it up. This is and actually this is a workshop that we did affiliated with it, which were families of textile workers from the neighborhood. So the Mills they are basically a contemporary art center for work having to do with textile. They're an experimental space with the Seed to Textile program is what we are a part of, where essentially we are artists who are looking to reevaluate our nature of our relationship with land, to really think about the production method of textiles and what is our relationship to the land that we live on. So Hong Kong is a place where during the British time, various rules, various laws were put into place that ordinary people can't own land generally. You don't own, and I suppose you could say in the West, that, well, we don't own land either, but most people own it from a bank, but there's a possibility of owning your own land and farming your own land, whereas here, that's just not. The government owns it as well as developers. So these are billion-dollar industries, companies, extremely rich. And this is part of why the land prices, the home prices in Hong Kong are the highest in the world, generally, usually among the highest in the world, because there's such a scarcity of land. And so land here is seen not as a place for production, for food, or for anything except money and real estate. And so it's not a very healthy relationship with land. We're a service economy, and that also, I think, part of why I'm careful of my wording here, but part of why people feel transient here. If you can't really own anything, you can't put down roots, you can't feel very connected to a place. And this is a place of immigrants too. Few Hong Kongers have been here more than 5 generations, except for some people in the small villages in the countryside who have been here for up to 800 years, their families. But for most people, they are relatively recent immigrants. And there's this idea that Hong Kong is a very open, immigrant-friendly society. It is and it's not. Anyway, but part of the reason why people do pass through and come and go and don't feel so connected is because of our relationship to the land. So I found this really a wonderful project because we could just show people, hey, you plant this seed and then you can create these plants and you can dye it with, dye things with it. I didn't do that part. My partner on this project, Benjamin Howe, he's the dyer. So I'm essentially the Western artist who does some Western paper making, which is essentially turning, it's essentially turning textiles into paper, which is where handmade paper has come from in the West for about 1,000 years. So that's what we did for this project. This is us setting up the exhibition. I used LED lights to highlight my personal work. So this was my contribution to it. 2/3 of it was essentially these watermarked shapes of stories of my migration. And we also worked with Hong Kong Design Institute students as well as Africa Center Hong Kong, and they contributed designs for kind of the centerpiece of the artwork, which this is what Ben Howe is doing in this video. You can see that here. So here he is working on the paper that I've made. It's a freshly laid sheet of paper, and then he's spooling paper pulp onto it, which he's dyed with indigo and also yellow with cap jasmine, which is a flower used in traditional Chinese medicine. So all of these, and indigo is also used in traditional Chinese medicine and in the West as well for facial products. And so these are shapes that were contributed by our collaborators, mostly from Africa Center Hong Kong. And these became part of the final work. So this is a stop motion. Think of us, yes. We made paper in a swimming pool.
Oh.
Yeah, and like with everywhere in Hong Kong, space is such an issue, and paper making is not dirty, but it's extremely, extremely wet. And so we had a very hard time finding a suitable space that would allow us to make big enough papers to really do things here. Because as you can see here, the paper screen, this one was quite large. It was actually over a meter at each side. It's like 1.4 by 1.4. It was just really big. So we kind of designed everything for that.
And you're in that earlier image, you're standing in the pool itself.
Yes, I had these galoshes that I wear, and yeah, this is the felt. So when you're drying a bunch of papers, you put Western style paper making, you use felts in between, and you squeeze out the water. We had a kind of a mobile paper studio, basically had 2 boards and then used like C clamps, or they call them G clamps here, to press them together. It's very primitive, but it was pretty effective. It's just the cotton that we used was basically waste cotton from the machine, the spinning machine demonstrations. So they've been holding it for years and they didn't know what to do with it. And so when that came along, they said, oh, this is perfect for us. However, the paper was very wrinkly, so we had, it was this, anyway, huge learning experience for all of us.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
read about stuff, but actually making it is a totally different thing. So this is a shot. And what was so fun about this, I've worked with light for years. So my background is in painting and printmaking. And then I started to work larger and larger, but always keeping it lightweight, like you said. So I can roll it up, essentially. I can mail an installation, or I can take an installation on the airplane in a tube. Sometimes it's 10 kilos, but it's very densely packed inside. This is harder though, because you have to keep them flat. But anyway, I'm always working with light. I worked with cyanotype for about 15 years as painting it, doing different kinds of printmaking with it. Not so much photos. I got bored with photos after about 5 minutes. I was like, this chemicals, what can I do with that nobody's ever done before? So it's such an egotist in my 20s. But eventually I found that I could use it like Chinese ink and then print things in it. And that was fun, but it got so technical and people asked so many technical questions. It became less about the ideas and more about the technique. And you got to kind of find a balance, because if you're talking about technique all the time, then people ignore the underlying ideas why it was made in the first place. It's not just a trick, a party trick. So this was really interesting in that, this exhibition had floor to ceiling windows that were 3 meters tall, in front of it, kind of in front of a courtyard. So in the daytime, it was very pale like this, very kind of soft blue light, and then the LED lights looked almost warm behind the paper. So these are mostly daytime shots. And then at nighttime, it was a lot more dramatic. You had a really, you could see the designs a lot more clearly. This is the central portion, which is quite hard to photograph. But this was done by Benjamin House. I made the underlying paper, I made the paper pulp for him, but he decided on the stencils and where they went. Really, our whole installation, we can't photograph it all at once because it's 20 meters long, like over 60 feet. And I had a video, maybe I can find it, where you go along the whole length of it. This photographer trucked it along. But yeah, it's a very moody piece at night.
Yeah, yeah. And your part of it with these shapes are they like a topographical map? Is that the
Exactly.
yeah?
Yeah,
Oh.
so I had two halves to it. This half, which I mostly featured because it's more visually dramatic, these were mostly shapes taken from the California coast where I was born. And the waves there are much more dramatic. And then the other side was of an island in Hong Kong that I've been wanting to live on for years, but I need to be close to work in my studio. So, but it's an island I go to whenever I need a holiday. We have 250 islands in Hong Kong. It's actually 70-80% country parks, and it's not all city. It's very, very seascape and rural as well. Yeah, this is one where we made the papers move using some wind. So that's what, and they were hung from the ceiling with clear fishing wire. And so with all of these, I really like to hang them so they move in the wind and they move with the atmosphere. It's not just a stationary piece. It's not exactly kinetic, but it's,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
each one is a little bit different depending on the mood of the humidity that day, the atmosphere. When they were made, of course, each one was rectangular, but then I cut it to shape
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
based on the landscape.
Huh. And I mean, there's something about depicting land in such a fragile way that like moves in the breeze that, yeah.
And in a way, I think that you're absolutely right. Thank you for seeing something that I haven't been able to see in the piece. But this is the other side with more the Hong Kong island kind of landscape. It is very fragile here. There's a real tenuous kind of fragile thing in terms of, because I knew coming here, yes, I'm an immigrant, but my stay here is transitory because I had hoped to put down roots here, to be honest, but it was very naive hope. It's not a place, as somebody once told me, you love Hong Kong more than Hong Kong loves you. And it's true. There are some places that just we are not meant to stay. We are meant to come and go. And so when I do move away, I will be back a couple months a year to work and do workshops and hopefully projects, and I will keep coming back, but I will not be able to stay here full time ever. It's just not the kind of place where it's practical for an artist to do that. I do want freedom of expression. I do want a place that I can feel a little more at home in, where the language is closer to my heart. I can speak Mandarin, some basic Mandarin, but that's the northern language. Cantonese not only is very difficult, but I think I took a bunch of Cantonese lessons when I first moved back here. But I just felt I just felt the distance. There's an inherent distance sometimes. Maybe if I were
Yeah,
different,
yeah.
I wouldn't feel such a distance, but I do. So it's just kind of coming to terms with, you know, this is how I am. I'm a Westerner, and I will never feel fully at home outside the West because I like Western food, and
Yeah,
I love Chinese food, but
yeah,
or Northern Chinese or Western Chinese, not so much Hong Kong food. And
yeah.
these little things that kind of make you feel at home. But kanji is my favorite. I
Yeah.
love fish. Kanji is one of my favorite foods ever. So I
Oh,
will.
I'm glad you got that in there in case someone even. No, I think that it's like I was watching a video about a couple that lived in Japan, and the guy was American, but he was Asian American, so not completely unfamiliar with you know, Asia's vast, but anyway. And then his wife is Japanese. So they moved to Japan to live. And he described this process of like, there's the honeymoon, which can last a couple of years.
Yeah.
Then it turns into like, I hate it here and everything is wrong. And then there's like, if you can make it through that time, then there's like the realism for the rest of your time. And I was thinking about, you know, like moving to Newfoundland, which is still in North America, yet it is a distinct culture. And
Very much.
I had the honeymoon phase and I had gone through the like, I hate this place. Everything is bad about this place. And now I feel like I'm moving into the realism part, which is kind of like, which might even include not staying. I mean, it's realism, it's, you know, in the sense of seeing the reality of what it means to be in a place and call it home. And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
And I think I used to I mean, there have been times in my life where I have realized, and this is going to sound pathetic, but I have realized that my home was on the internet, because the internet is this which is partly why I think mentally I'm like more like a millennial than a tail end Gen X, because so I remember being like stuck in Laos for some reason, doing some research like in 2009 for something, and I was like, oh, as soon as I sent somebody an email, I was like, I feel at home here, but in a way it was I was existing in this other plane. And now there's a lot of talk about this, but I have to say, as an Anglophone, you know, North America, the internet is essentially a North American creation. And so it's like a mobile North America, wherever we want to go, whatever. But in China, it was tough because it was blocked. And I think in a way, when my husband and I moved I've lived in 13 countries, at least 7 of which were with him. And we moved around so much and so often that there was a period where that was the case. And eventually I realized I need to, as an artist, I need to put my feet in a place for a while and just steadiness and have that kind of
Yeah.
digging my feet in as stability. It's not because I'm getting old, but I knew that I needed to make better work than I was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
luckily Hong Kong, I found a job that allowed me the stability, that allowed me the ability to live here. And I put in lots more than my 10,000 hours at this job, making art with other people or with other people in mind, and always incorporating what I make, but it was with other people. And that has been really wonderful experience. It's taught me so much, you know, working within these communities. I'm going to Shanghai in April if the visa can go through, and to work with some of our campuses there. And I love that. I miss speaking Mandarin. I miss being in a place where
All right, we're back. We had a little glitch in our.
I had to change my SIM card. Yes, thank you for your patience.
It's okay. This is now the second time something like this has happened, so it's good. Anyway, it's always interesting, as these are very spontaneous conversations, to even have a few minutes to kind of digest what happened, and it feels like an opportunity to yeah, even in like a moment, digest some of what you shared. So interesting. And I think I'll share my screen now, and I'm going to share to your website, which I guess you did as well. And so this was your ventilation project, which you referred to earlier. And there were a couple others that just really were caught my eye and really made me think a lot. But the frame by time one, which you know is ongoing, as you say, I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about this one and what it means. I'm happy to stop. I mean, for me, this particular piece is just really evocative, and I really love that I mean, I think you mentioned like you really use your space that you're in as the site of your artwork, and even like the material of it, in the sense of using what is exactly around you.
Yeah, basically I see actually the printing, the frame that I used to make the paper is right here,
Yeah.
right next to me. Um, so this artwork was one of several that I did. The idea was it would be a year of paper. It was part of a year-long project. And this is my floor. It's a typical tile floor of the era that you see in Southeast Asia and Chinese homes. And again, a Hong Konger will recognize and say, that's Hong Kong. But actually, it's not just in Hong Kong, it's southern China and Malaysia and parts of Indonesia, you will see this as well. And these floors, that's honestly why I love this apartment. I get home every day and walk up 9 flights of stairs, I collapse on the floor. It's just, these tiles are part of what is home for me. The pattern is just very soothing. Anyway, this particular artwork is made of two materials, essentially pages from a book project that didn't work out. That's the kind of cream color. And the stripe in the center comes from a shirt I used to wear in my studio, linen and cotton. So it's technically made of bamboo fiber, mulberry, and linen and cotton. So it's kind of Western and Asian materials together. But the materiality aspect is part of it. But really, this to me is kind of a print of my space, a print of time where I'm living. And I had this at Art Central Art Fair last year, and it sold. And I don't know who owns it now, but whoever it is has a piece of my life in their home or in
Wow,
their
wow.
office. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about taking this direct print off of the floor that instantly puts it into the realm of memory and all that that implies. And then the fact that I don't know if it's come up yet in our conversation, but you have it on your in your statement that all your paper pieces really have. It's not just that you're using some kind of anonymous paper material, but it actually has a history and a memory in the actual paper. Like you said, this was a book project that didn't work out, so it had been handled and had a history before it became this piece.
Yes, I have been obsessed with materiality actually since the beginning, since the beginning of making art. And it took me years to figure out why, and it was very humbling. So I'm the daughter of I'm the atheist daughter of a Catholic theologian and a former Catholic nun. And so, Catholicism, not just Christianity, but hardcore conservative Catholicism was very much a part of my background and worldview. Um, Even though I've rejected it ever since I can remember, there's still parts of it that very much affect how I see the world, my place in it, and the whole act of transubstantiation, which is where the wine and the bread become part of a cannibalistic rite. Right? That transformation, that sacred act of transforming material into something loaded with meaning. So you drink this, and it's wine, but it's also blood, and it's not. I mean, in the belief system, it's not just uh, a pretend thing, but you are drinking blood, and it is reference. It's honestly a very fundamental kind of ancient thing. Many cultures around the world have these kind of rites. But to me, the material transformation, that's what artists do, and that's what I do. And so I really seek materials that have deep personal meaning for me, often, materials of conflict or materials of things that I want to kind of, I guess I want to sanctify it. I don't know. I don't know if I want to be using these words, but that transformative process is something that very much it goes beyond alchemy for me. It really is something very meaningful.
I love that. And as you're saying that, I'm like, it looks like one of those wafers.
It does. Oh my gosh. Except it's like this big.
Yeah.
And by the way, the stripe in the middle is actually, I tried to make the stroke for one in Chinese. So that was the idea. This is the first one, and that's the number one in Chinese, the horizontal
Right.
line.
Yeah. Yeah. But it also looks wine colored.
It does a bit. It has a little bit of a purple tint to it. And I'm currently working with paper now that I commissioned from a French paper maker in the Bordeaux region. His studio is in the middle of these vineyards, and he's tinted the paper with wine from
Mm.
last year's harvest for me. So yeah, that's a project I'll be showing this May. Very exciting.
Yeah. Sounds super interesting. Oh, there, yes. Now this one, I feel like I can relate, though probably maybe not for the correct reason, but glass that washes up on the beaches in Newfoundland is a big thing. Glass and ceramic shards, and yeah, so this feels almost well. It's yeah.
Yeah, this has been part of a collection I've been building. Lots of different kinds of materials, but the glass I collected mainly from this one beach in Hong Kong. That's a prison beach. It's where a prison used to be. Um, Many Vietnamese people who came in the 70s and 80s on boats were detained there. And now I think it's a prison where there was a drug rehabilitation center. So it's a beach that's kind of sad, it's abandoned, and yet a lot of these bottles that you see are from junk boats mostly. People in junk boats and they or ships and they toss them overboard, and so it's the remnants of people's pleasure that wash up on this beach.
Mhm.
It's kind of a sad beach, but the bricks and stuff come from my favorite beach in Hong Kong, a beach I've photographed for years, and it's basically these little village houses that have been torn down and thrown into the sea and illegally. Once new houses are built, these are little village houses. Yeah, and so I love that these bricks are worn smooth by the sea. You can see the different kind of clay that go in them. They were locally produced, probably 60, 80 years old. And other of the glass were from windows, the typical windows of the era. So in a way, it's like I was collecting these bits of home. So this period of time where I've been collecting have been the 7 years that I'm here for immigration. So I will be a permanent resident this August after 7 years of straight living and working in Hong Kong, which is very lucky. Most countries don't, a lot of countries in Asia don't do this. They don't allow this, but Hong Kong does, at least for now. And so for me, this is my immigration kind of series. What form will it look like eventually? I'm not sure exactly. Some of these I've been soaking in brine from the salt pans where I worked at a couple years ago as a volunteer. That I was paid in brine for these works that I did in the salt pans, these 300-year-old salt pans on an island, on a Hakka island. And so that's been, yeah, playing with salt and crystallization onto these various things, working with the atmosphere. How does that work? It's not a dead end project, but it's currently stalled because I'm not sure exactly what form it will
Yeah,
take.
yeah.
Yeah, I have some ideas, but we'll have to see. For now, I just keep collecting until August, and then I have to stop collecting and turn them into something.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, well, these certainly feel like a little heavier than your usual things.
Definitely, it's probably 10 kilos at least of. I have at least 3 kilos of ceramics, blue and white ceramics, hand
Oh,
painted. Each one is like a little painting.
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm very intrigued about the salt and the brine. That sounds fascinating. Yeah, salt is fascinating from like a human history perspective and its relation to the ocean. And yeah, really interesting.
So all the images in this particular kind of section have come from projects that are time dependent.
Mm.
So the year of paper was 1 year. Now I'm kind of doing something else with paper. This is a 7 year project. The one at the top with the shadow in the hand is
Yeah.
actually, it's again, I don't know how much to say about this one yet, but it's called something that, yeah, it's a week of Sundays where essentially I document my skin, the interaction of the light through the windows on my skin, on my body in this space, 2 times a year in the solstice, winter and summer solstice. And so this is one with the hands. Others have been where it creates silhouettes on my body. I'll probably make a film out of this eventually. For now, I just have been saving the material. I think a lot of this I will probably work on when I'm in my next location, when I'm
Uh,
not in the middle of it so much now. Because a lot
yeah.
of this stuff is just, it has this meaning. I don't have the perspective yet. You know what I mean?
Right.
These were started at a time, most of these, when these really started to move along during the period of protest and the pandemic, which was a very hard time for us here. And elicited a lot of emotions, and I was trying to process them through these projects that were time limited. And I think I'm going to have to wait until I'm away from it to really make something worth showing.
Yeah. 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 I mean, how is it to, I mean, to do something durational, but the duration is 7 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a commitment of a different level than, a week.
I think some people, because I know some, I suppose one of my favorite artists, Hong Kong artists, she's mostly in Portugal now, but she very much comes from here. Years ago, she started this project called Travel Into My Bookshelf. Her name is Mavana Chen. And when I had my house in Sicily, I had kind of an artist residency, and I invited artists, especially artists from Asia, come and make work there, artists who work with paper. And she has had this project where she weaves, she studied fashion design, but she creates these body containers where she weaves paper into these flexible things. And she's very tiny, she's barely 5 feet tall. And she covers herself in these. And now she's making this scarf that I think she started 10, 15 years ago, and she'll be doing it for the rest of her life. She travels for a new friend's place each time, and she weaves a book of theirs into her artwork. And so she wove my book from Sicily. It was a book that I printed on paper, commissioned by my publisher, and so she wove a draft into her scarf. So now it's part of her, part of her project. But I really respond to artists who have a particular set of parameters. It can seem arbitrary, but it's not really. Like, you know, a lot of people come to Hong Kong, and if they become foreigners and if they become permanent residents, it's almost by accident or because they fall in love with the place or they love their job. For me, it was very much this time a decision, because I needed, for a lot of reasons, financial stability, a city I loved, and in order to be here, I committed basically 8 years of my life to being here, even though I knew in a way my heart was elsewhere, And so that commitment to say 8 years of my 40s, basically spending in this city that I love, that has a lot of issues, and I'm going to do that. And so in a way, the artwork is just an extension of that commitment.
Yeah, yeah.
Not just, but yeah, it's a physical manifestation of that commitment.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying and sort of thinking about some of your other projects, I'm really just appreciating how they invite a level of complexity and nuance into ideas that it's kind of, I don't know, easy or tempting to see in very black and white terms, or kind of assume we know how we feel about a certain thing. I mean, it's even certainly to hear, if you live in the US, especially if you hear the word immigrant, there's a connotation that whether you are, has just been, it's just there for everyone, whether or not it's something you might really honestly agree with or whatever, but because that word has been weaponized. And I guess I'm just really appreciating an opportunity to just counter some of that indoctrination, uh, to see things in a more nuanced way. Yeah.
Thank you for articulating it like that, because I think so. When we move to a new place, I have figured out that for me it takes about 6 years to establish myself in a place artistically, if we can call it that. It was only after I'd been here previously 2 years and kept connections, but then when I moved back to Hong Kong, my life was totally different. I had a job that was art related. I was a contemporary artist doing stuff that people recognize as contemporary this time, whereas before it was more illustration. And I go to openings, and because I'm living in the middle of things here, I just am more kind of essential in the city. Whereas previously I lived on an island, it was very idyllic. I loved it, but it was not close to the pulse of the city. It was very distant from it. So when I came back, I felt like I had to start all over again, which was surprising. I had context, but a lot of people had changed, and I didn't live on the island anymore. And people didn't want to come here to the events that I was throwing. And so what was my point? My point is I really had to start over, and I feel like, again, when I move again, it'll be into a new language, well, an old language for me, but new and totally different. And but I think more of a connection, but it'll probably take 6 years again. And it's just like, oh, that's gonna be the last time. That's it, you know. But at the same time, it's like, in a way, I try and look at it. Okay, if I live to be 75 or so, we die young in my family with cancer, but I don't know. I'm not joking about that. My father died at 71, so, but yeah, probably 75. So by the time I die, if I die at 75, I'll have a quarter of a century in North America, a quarter of a century in Asia, and a quarter of a century in Europe. Okay, that's like a life of thirds.
Well, that certainly is very neatly organized.
If only life for that,
Right.
but you know, in a way, when you think about it, as you get older and you look at art history and you look at the times that people were living in, and it was when I moved to Beijing that I realized, wow, artists in the mainland, China, are very conscious of what era of art history they're in, whereas I wasn't in North America. I don't know how you feel about that, but I didn't feel I was part of art history. But actually, having left North America for good, I have left North American art history. And when I realized that a few years ago, there was a kind of feeling of loss. It's like, well, I chose this path, you know, but that I will forever be separated from, you know, yeah, North America formed me and the trauma of that. And but yeah, I've left that art history for what
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, certainly, like as you say, is living in settler colonized place, a sort of new, uh, horrible way to call it that, but you know, it's like our sense of time is so particular, and you know, to go to a culture like China that has millennia deep with you know, of culture. I can't even actually imagine what that feels like in a body to be part of something like that, you know?
Well,
And
that,
yeah.
yeah, and I wouldn't speak for Chinese artists, but the sense that I got living there, I mean, realistically, most of China was not 5,000 years of continual history. Like most of it was not. It's much more complex than they let on. Um, but for a lot of Chinese artists, there was very much this feeling of we now from the 90s to the 2000s and 2010s, it was this resurgence, this real active like resurgence, making things new and I guess elements from the West, oil painting, yeah, oil painting sells a lot better than another thing. It's easy to transport, da da da. You know, it's a practical medium, oil painting. Yes, 4 years was not even nearly enough to understand anything. It was just a beginning, but it was amazing. It was amazing being in Beijing. I loved it. Yes, it was the most polluted place I've ever lived. I got so sick, my sinuses were destroyed in Beijing. And I knew that moving there was going to be hard. But it, there was a real wonderful spirit of we are working super hard. We are fighting this pollution. We are, you know, this is really, it was very exciting time. Yeah, things changed, but it was really amazing to just be there to witness that. As a Westerner, I was not wanted, you know, my work was irrelevant, you know, but it was wonderful to just be there during that time,
Yeah.
making work, breathing the same air, you know, same polluted air.
Right. Right. Yeah, you know, a couple times in our conversation, I've thought about the artist Andy Goldsworthy, and in particular that movie that was made about him, which now I'm forgetting what the name of the movie was. Do you know it?
I know I've seen clips of it. I don't think I've seen the whole thing.
Something Tides or something like that. Anyway, at one point he talks about um, that he's living in this town in Scotland, and he's really just kind of appreciating the depth of knowledge and depth of memory that people who have been in that town for generation carry. And he's, of course, working with the land, but realizing sort of like like it's such a humbling experience because he's a relative newcomer, and so he's just barely understanding anything about the rhythm of the land and the seasons and the to me it's one of the most beautiful passages in the film because he's yeah just kind of it's a very kind of humble moment. And I've thought about it a lot here in terms of how I experience the seasons um, and relate to the land, which on one hand feels quite deep and, like you say, bone deep, and then another way I don't have a clue what's going on.
Yes. Absolutely. I so feel that with you. I think that's why I have sought out and continue to seek out working with artists who are of these places, like Ben here last year, who have a deep connection with the land, who understand it. Ben's an immigrant, well, his family, immigrated 4 generations ago from Mongolia and other parts of China. But they have this rhythm with the land and the seasons that I love collaborating with. I feel like I don't have the right to engage directly with the land and a lot of these kind of things that I need. That the only way for me to do so is to work with an intermediary, which is why, yeah, for the future. Yeah, that's why I really love these kind of collaborative opportunities that come up occasionally.
Yeah, you don't have a right because you are this newcomer.
Yeah, and that perhaps I don't even, some people have said, yes, I can give a new perspective. I don't even think about it that way. It's just in order for me to, like, okay, when I lived in Australia, I was quite ignorant of aspects of, so I was saying, oh, I love the colors of these earths here. I would love to do something with that. And then an Australian friend of mine she was white, but she said, it's sacred here. You can't do that. And I was like, oh, of course, And after she told me that, it was like, because I had grown up as a kid playing with chalk from the earth in the playground, so I would just grab from the earth and make drawings with it. Um, but of course, yeah, in a place where the land is sacred, and honestly, the land where I grew up was sacred. We
Yeah,
just lost that.
it's actually everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So interesting. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, it really feels like the reckoning of our time is really understanding what does that actually mean.
So as you see here, a lot of people used to say, "Oh, you like blue." I said, "Well, blue is just kind of a byproduct of the things that I like to do. It's not that I focus on blue necessarily." But yeah, often, when artists or people ask me, what is your medium? And I usually try and just summarize it by saying, I work with two-dimensional processes like painting and printmaking, but I really like to go large and wrap it around architecture. So when you go into it, it's modular. So yes, it looks different every time in every space, and it's lightweight, it's fragile, but it's patterns. And in a sense, I never did abstract patterns until I moved to Asia, and then I have a figurative background, of course, as a young artist trained in Western painting and printmaking. Western aesthetics was start with the body, and I did a lot of figurative work. And in a sense, as I look to move back to the West, I'm getting drawn towards that again. I don't know what form that'll take, but it's almost as if I'm realizing after 20 years of living in this place, this amazing continent, it's like I've left my body out of my work in a lot of ways. I've left the body out of my work, and in a way perhaps to avoid some certain questions. I don't know, maybe I'll realize later on. And then, because and then when I move back to the West again, the body may come back to my work in new ways. I do know that in the West, I feel more comfortable in my body, in my skin, than I do in Asia. I love it here, but there's always a reserve, of being the other. And having to cover up a little more, just be careful about that. It's a modest society, and I respect that. Yeah, it's just different. So
Yeah.
I have my clothes I wear in the West, and I have my clothes I wear here. They're a little different.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough too. Can I ask you maybe about one more project that really
Yes.
just so beautiful? It's this Fatherland Prince project.
Good. I
It
don't know
seems
how
a
many
little
of them
like
are visible.
obviously a very singular project because it was a time when you were with your father, right?
Yeah, it was when I was kind of processing his passing. Yeah, there are just, I don't know how many are viewable in public. Maybe all of them are now.
Mhm.
Yeah, I made one for each, one kind of triptych for each year of his life. So I worked with a printing studio, so 71. I worked with the printing studio in Barcelona, had a residency there during the summer after my father passed away. Um, and so technically it was super challenging. It was it was fascinating. This was in a sense, this series, so it was 2018. This project was the beginning of my reckoning with America. After having left it for 15 years at the time, it was like I had avoided the whole issue. But in a sense, like America incarnated in a person, you know, in
Mhm.
what I came from and my father. So the paper I used, I commissioned, or I worked with a papermaker in San Francisco, which is the area where I was born, the region where I was born, and they were part of the, oh yeah, okay, cool, some of the composite images showed up. And yeah, so essentially the paper was made of, US military uniforms that had been in service in Afghanistan and then brought back and turned into paper. It's kind of therapy for those officers who had worn them. And then the paper was, I bought some of the papers used for this series. And then I worked with starting imagery from, my father passed away in Minneapolis in the wintertime, and his house was right next to the river. And so it was very humid. And he died at home. And so all of us were able to be there with him. It was like a month, but I was there for the last couple of weeks. And that time of year, you know this well, condensation, humidity freezes on the windows, right? That time of year. And his breath created these lattices on the windows that were really beautiful. And so I took photos of it at the time, not knowing what I would do with it, just, grieving and struck by this and thinking of this as actually the transubstantiation he often talked about as we were growing up, the materiality of our breath and of our being that lasted, it lasted and then it lasted a couple days after he did on the window. So I photographed that and just, I thought, oh, all these emotions that you have when a parent dies, regardless of how you feel about them, you love them, of course. And so I just traced those in and yeah, dug them into wood blocks. So this was a combination of wood blocks and etching and a whole bunch of things. Essentially, I printed with the printmakers. Every day I printed an evolution of it. So more and more ink, 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 more on each one, and then more. Yeah, it's very complicated. Oh, I
Yeah,
couldn't have done this alone. I had to do it with a master printmaker. So
yeah,
this, yeah.
yeah. There, I was curious about the choice of the military uniforms, but I think I understand better now that you talked about it, and maybe it is partly because I'm those patterns on windows. Yeah, but also, yeah, there's like this evolution that the project reveals, and
Yeah, so the one at the top is, in a sense, I mean, literally, and I was going to turn this into an animation, and then I realized it's not more effective as an animation. I think it's good if they're viewed individually, but it's as though the life is beginning to materialize. So at the top, it's just white ink on the paper, and
yeah,
then as the years go up, more and more details emerge, and his start of his lifelong project. I was thinking a lot about that year. He's founded this department at his university, and now there are several dozen across the U.S. Catholic studies. So the goal of Catholic studies was to have a Catholic perspective on art, literature, philosophy, and thought, and kind of, in a way, be a way to have the idea of a university with a spiritual side to it. So
yeah.
that's what created. And yeah, they had a chapel there in the building. It was all very, and for this atheist, it was still like, processing all that. And these colors that I did later on. So every year, a little bit more. And then once he started on his final, big project, after most of us were out of the house, and he had more time, then the colors started. So I used some ochre colors, natural earth colors. These were some difficult times in my life.
Yeah.
The black ink. And
Well,
this studio, yeah.
No. I mean, for me, as I was scrolling, when you said you thought about making it animated, I had that thought, when I was sort of moving it quickly, I was like, oh, it feels like an animation. But there's just something, I also just thought the way that there's these marks are like some kind of language, and you're talking about time. Yeah. I'm scrolling.
Yeah, exactly. To me, I'm
Yeah.
trying, what was I, going through at the time? I was thinking a lot about his, what do we have as our life project? What to encapsulate our life?
Yeah, and to just think, in case someone watching doesn't know, that when you make a print, it's a process. It's not a drawing. It's not like an immediate mark on the page. There's a whole, like, you have to have the press set up. I don't know, were you doing one on a press? Because there's also a bit of an emboss.
Huge presses.
Yeah.
Yes. So the copper, actually the woodblock was embossed as well. We did a kind of a reverse. So it was very technical. We used at least 3 different processes for each of these. And so these colors as well, once the colors start up, or the black ink, Sumi ink, which was a tribute to Miro, because this studio used to do Miro's prints. They worked together a lot in Barcelona. And then these ochre colors, which I did later, were my father's favorite colors for his living rooms and his building and the campus, and they were so my dad. And so I chose these colors because they were natural earth colors from the Mediterranean, a region that he loved, and that I love. I know I'm part of it because of him. And more, so each of these papers were first hand tinted by me, and then the center one was a copper plate with also to emboss in, and then also with the wood cut on top, and then the sides were wood block prints. And the master printer who I worked with, Virginie Barbara, was just an amazing printmaker. I highly recommend, if you can spend a month in Barcelona working with them. They're just incredible.
Yeah.
These papers are really hard to work with. They're not meant for printmaking. So he did a wonderful job.
Yeah. It's a very powerful series, in my opinion. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. So maybe is there something as a way of closing, concluding this very delicious conversation?
I am not a depressed person, number one thing, but this is the stuff that I work out. I work through problems in my work, and I have to say, one of the things, my job, so I work as artist in residence for an education foundation, and I love so many aspects of my job, but I think my favorite aspect is working with the problem kids, because they are, they tend to be the most interesting artists, but mostly just because I get to see how art makes them feel better. Just making it, the process of making it, doing things, cutting up little shapes, whatever it may be, these therapy, and it reminds me that that's why I do all this.
Yeah.
In a sense, people are like, oh, are you born to be an artist? I don't think so. I mean, talent is relative. Sure, I could draw when I was a kid. It's not about that. I think every kid can draw, everybody can draw, but in a way, I think the only reason why I've been able to do it this long is because I made a lot of choices that put art as number one, and I still do, and I always will,
Yeah, I have to say, looking at the work, I don't get a sense of depression. I get a sense of investigation. Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Thank you. I should put that in my bio. Thanks
Well,
so much, Robin.
thank you.